Around Christmas this year, violent mobs rampaged through Maputo, the capital of Mozambique. Chinese-owned supermarkets were the first to suffer. An armored vehicle, originally provided by China to help maintain stability, was hijacked and used to ram open the gates of Chinese shops. The two-story metal shutters crashed down with sharp screams and frenzied curses filling the air. Store after store was ransacked. Everything in sight, from rice to televisions, sound systems to general goods, were looted. In just a few hours, several large Chinese supermarkets in the city center, with inventory worth millions of yuan, were completely emptied. The looting didn't stop there. Shops were set on fire, with thick smoke billowing from the scenes captured in videos. The China-Mozambique Agricultural Technology Center, part of an official cooperation project, was also vandalized. Protesters claimed it symbolized corrupt deals and destroyed whatever they could. If it could be torn down or burned, they did it. Their goal was to humiliate the current Mozambican government. Whether there are masterminds or conspiracies fueling the violence, it remains unclear. But one thing is certain: anti-Chinese sentiment has spread, and the government forces were unable to control the situation. In the first few days, the riots were concentrated in major cities like Maputo, but by December 27, the violence had spread to surrounding towns. More and more areas were caught in the chaos of looting, arson, and violence. In remote areas, police forces were already understaffed and poorly equipped. Now, officers could only defend police stations and had no capacity to patrol. As a result, once peaceful towns descended into disaster. By the time the government realized the severity of the situation, troops were hastily deployed. But even the military struggled to deal with the masked mobile rioters. Criminal gangs seized the opportunity, looting supplies and setting factories ablaze under the banner of anti-government protests. One group even stormed a prison, freeing 150 inmates by force. The trigger for these riots was Mozambique's recent elections. The ruling Mozambique Democratic Socialist Party, Frelimo, pulled out all the stops to maintain its grip on power. Allegations of backroom deals and electoral fraud were rampant. On December 23rd, Mozambique's Constitutional Council officially announced that Frelimo's candidate, Daniel Chapo, won with 65% of the vote. This ensured the long-standing ruling party, in power for half a century, would continue to govern. But the announcement was immediately met with widespread skepticism. It was obvious to many that the results were questionable. Opposition candidate Vinicio Mondlane was the first to protest. He outright rejected the official results, presenting his team's vote counts as evidence that he was the legitimate winner. The European Union Observer Mission also weighed in, reporting they had witnessed irregularities during the counting process and unjustified changes to results at polling stations. Mondlane responded forcefully, declaring he would hold his own inauguration next month. In the TikTok livestream, he even directly appealed to incoming US President Trump, requesting international intervention. The tension is noticeable. One could even feel it through the screen. Mondlane's confidence is not unfounded. The Election Commission's report is riddled with inconsistencies. Fraud was blatant, with vote counts manually altered in pencil. It's as if the authorities believed the entire nation wouldn't notice. Mondlane's supporters erupted, launching the largest and most intense anti-government protests since Mozambique's independence. The demonstrations quickly spiraled out of control. In Maputo alone, 237 stores were looted, with over 100 belonging to Chinese owners. Chinese aid projects and businesses were also targeted, seen as political accomplices and ransacked. Local businesses have been completely paralyzed. In Maputo, Gaza province, a Chinese-owned supermarket was looted simply because of rumors that the owner was close to the mayor, marking it as a political accomplice. Another Chinese tourism project linked to the president Felipe Nyusi was smashed to pieces by rioters. The situation has escalated to extremes. Some interpret it as local forces resisting a pro-China government, while others see it as the people's long-standing resentment towards the corrupt ruling party finally finding an outlet. At its core, The Mozambique Frelimo Party has roots in communism. When it was founded in 1962, the Soviet Union and China supplied weapons, trained soldiers, and even taught them how to organize and spread propaganda. After Mozambique gained independence from Portuguese rule in 1975, Frelimo took power, modeling itself after the Soviet Union by modeling a socialist state, implementing land reforms, nationalizing businesses, and enforcing a planned economy. However, the collapse of the Soviet Union left them without external support, forcing Mozambique to abandon communism in 1994 in favor of multi-party democracy and a market economy. Despite this, Frelimo's authoritarian nature persisted. It monopolized political power and became deeply entrenched in corruption. Today, electoral chaos is a continuation of this complex history, while public discontent and resistance represent decades of accumulated frustration erupting over electoral fraud. Considering Mozambique's current economic struggles, despite being rich in resources like gemstones, natural gas, and precious timber, ordinary people can barely afford to eat. Public infrastructure is crumbling, inflation is high, unemployment is widespread, and yet Chinese businesses are seen working hand in hand with government officials to quietly siphon off the country's wealth. Opposition parties have seized on this issue, accusing Chinese investments of propping up the corrupt government, directing protesters' anger towards Chinese businesses. Some research institutions have revealed that Chinese investments in major projects in Cabo Delgado province and Maputo have enriched officials, while the poor remain destitute. Widespread resentment towards the wealthy has fueled a wave of anti-Chinese violence, spiraling out of control. Mobs swarm Chinese warehouses like locusts, taking everything they carry, regardless of its value. Before leaving, they set fires, driven by a twisted sense of retribution born from hopelessness and despair. People are left asking, why are Chinese businesses being targeted in Mozambique? The answer lies in how many Chinese people live there, often running large supermarkets, mining operations, and tourism ventures. At first, their lives were comfortable, and their businesses thrived through close relationships with local officials. Bribes and backdoor deals made permits and licenses easy to obtain. But what angered locals the most was the timber trade. Year after year, unchecked deforestation has led to the illegal export of timber to China worth $23 million annually. The scale of deforestation could cover thousands of football fields. Even more alarming, some Chinese companies pay off local terrorist groups to protect their logging operations, with as much as 10% of their profits going to armed militants. This revenue stream nets terrorists nearly $2 million a month. The rosewood in northern Mozambique is internationally protected, but Chinese traders continue to smuggle it by bribing officials for logging permits. Corrupt Frelimo officials benefit from these transactions and see no incentive to stop them. At the same time, local workers endure harsh treatment. They earn just $67 a month and are often verbally or physically abused. It's no wonder Mozambicans resent Chinese businesses, viewing them as co-conspirators of corruption and ecological destruction. Locals rely on the land to survive, only to watch their forests vanish and resources drained by Chinese firms. Insurgents profit from the timber trade, intensifying conflict, and ordinary people's hatred grows. Recent investigations reveal that between October 2023 and March 2024, 300 containers of redwood totaling 10,000 tons were seized in Beria port, valued at $18 million. The shipments were bound for China, with many lacking proper legal documentation. Ultimately, unscrupulous traders sacrificed Mozambique's ecology and livelihoods for profit, tarnishing the reputation of Chinese businesses. As opposition forces rise and public anger builds, Chinese nationals are labeled corrupt accomplices, leading to attacks and looting. It mirrors the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where resentment toward Chinese mining firms runs high. Crackdowns and mass arrests of Chinese workers no longer surprise anyone. For years, China has poured massive funds into Africa, building roads, bridges, and buildings under the banner of China-Africa Brotherhood. In reality, These ventures extract resources and expand political influence at the expense of Chinese taxpayers. While ordinary Chinese citizens struggle with long hospital queues and rising education costs, aid to Africa continues to flow without restraint. The recent anti-Chinese riots in Mozambique and the DRC have cast doubt on the strength of this brotherhood and left many in China feeling deceived and exploited. Some voices defend Chinese businesses, blaming local workers for being lazy and inefficient. But reality shows that arrogance and discrimination towards locals inevitably spark public backlash. Many Chinese firms exclusively hire Chinese workers, marginalizing or exploiting local labor, fueling discontent. Chinese aid projects are siphoned off by corrupt officials, leaving little for ordinary people. Scandals like the Chinese female companions policy, providing African students with scholarships and stipends, have fueled domestic outrage. Often, the beneficiaries are the children of African elites who later join the cycle of power and wealth, while ordinary citizens remain impoverished and resentful. Seeing the riots and anti-Chinese sentiment in Mozambique, it's clear that similar crises are brewing across Africa. Whether in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, Nigeria, or Tanzania, those who benefit make fortunes, while the majority are left with nothing. The growing discontent among the majority is fueled by the close ties between authorities and Chinese businesses. Moreover, Western powers are unlikely to miss the chance to curb China's influence in Africa, encouraging protests that paint China as the new colonialist. The most absurd part is that Chinese nationals in Mozambique thought that by helping the Chinese government support the ruling party, building infrastructure, and delivering equipment, they would receive protection. But when armed mobs came knocking, the embassy's response was dismissive. Either this is a local issue, handle it yourselves, or the foreign ministry line is busy. Even if someone managed to get through, the response was often, "We're not sure what's happening there." As desperate Chinese merchants posted videos pleading for help, public opinion in China erupted with sarcasm and ridicule. Big spender abroad, dead silent when it comes to protecting citizens. Wolf warrior diplomacy turns into turtle diplomacy when real wolves show up. These kinds of jokes have spread rapidly. Those with foreign passports booked flights immediately, while those holding Chinese passports had no choice but to endure the violence. Some could only joke bitterly, "If things get worse, I'll pretend to be Korean or Japanese. Maybe I'll get beaten less." As ridiculous as it sounds, it reflects the harsh reality. In some areas, Chinese nationals reportedly armed themselves, buying guns for self-defense. When mobs arrived, they were ready to fight back. This kind of self-rescue may work in the short term, but risks breaking local laws and escalating tensions further. In Africa, gunfights rarely end well. The locals knew the terrain, and if things spiral out of control, Chinese nationals are at a severe disadvantage. But beyond arming themselves and sticking together, there seem to be few alternatives. Evacuation is dangerous. Armed groups lie in wait to rob Chinese merchants, seeing them as easy targets. Political resentment adds fuel to the fire, making escape as perilous as staying. The anger isn't limited to Mozambique. Videos from the Democratic Republic of the Congo show Chinese nationals being beaten, humiliated, and even tied up and mocked in public. Do locals hate the Chinese by nature? No, it's because they see no future, no respect, and lash out at the most visible scapegoat. Officials blame populist extremists and irrational mobs, but more reports point to Chinese businesses bribing officials, damaging the environment, and hiring armed groups to evict villagers and seize resources. Chinese workers dispatched to Africa have long learned to shut down operations during elections to avoid risk. Mobs make no distinction. Anyone can be dragged from their car and burned alive. A number of Chinese aid workers have lost their lives abroad. On October 13th, 2024, a Chinese professional and his wife working at a transmit site in Brazzaville in the Republic of Congo were shot during a robbery. His wife lost her life instantly, while he was wounded. The local government promised an investigation, but most know these cases rarely lead to real justice. A specialist named Jiang from Wanzhou district in Chongqing was fatally stabbed by robbers in Monrovia, Liberia. By the time she arrived at the hospital, she had lost too much blood. As for the many medical aid workers long stationed in Africa, countless have been robbed, held hostage, or infected with malaria and other diseases. In recent years, China has poured money into Africa, building ports, mining, and large-scale infrastructure. But looking back, the gap between the promised benefits for the people and the actual results is glaring. The average African citizen has gained little, while officials and Chinese businesses' elites quietly reap the rewards. Public patience has its limits. Though riots may be temporarily suppressed by police and military force, history shows that such resentment and unrest tend to grow, ready to erupt again at any moment. What comes next remains uncertain. Can the opposition seize power? Will the Chinese merchants who lost everything return home or seek opportunities in other African nations? Will an external power step in, turning Mozambique into another battleground for geopolitical influence? No one knows for sure. But one thing is clear. If China continues exploiting Africa under the guise of brotherhood, ignoring the suffering of local people, anti-Chinese violence, revenge, and conflict will only escalate.